From the discovery of the fantastic burial place of Tutancâmon to a sparsely attended funeral in South London, the career of archaeologist Howard Carter was one of stark contrasts, between high adventure and deep disappointment, between fame and neglect, a blessing and a curse. The world was quite literally amazed by Howard Carter's discovery in November 1922 of the almost intact tomb of a young pharaoh of New Kingdom Egypt who died in about 1323 BC. The press competed for the latest, exciting news of the discovery. Tourists flocked to the Valley of the Kings in the Theban hills to catch a glimpse of strange treasures which had lain undisturbed for well over 3,000 years. In Europe and America, the new mass media created a new craze, Tapmania, which seemed to be everywhere. In 1922, this was the most powerful peacetime craze the world had ever seen.
The tombs in the Valley of the Kings.
Today, stimulated by a series of multi-million-dollar exhibitions of the contents of Tutankhamun's tomb, which toured the globe in the 1960s and 70s, millions of visitors come to the tomb itself and to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where the original discoveries unearthed by Howard Carter and his team, the jewelry, the funerary equipment, in short, the gold, are displayed complete and intact.
Which is almost
La madera hecha sicomoro y el trabajo aquí, como ya sabemos. Y pueden ver aquí el trabajo del vestido con la falda o el adorno dorado.
You know, this is the small king, 18 years old, second one in the scene. So we're going to see everything belongs to the Tutankhamun.
More than anything else, they come to stare at the famous face of Tutankhamun. But few would recognize the face of the man whose name was all over the headlines in the 1920s, but who died lonely and embittered in 1939. What sort of a person was Howard Carter, the man who found and dug up the priceless treasures of Tutankhamun? His life story and the story of the buried treasure in the Valley of the Kings contains some of the fiercest contradictions in modern archaeology, as well as some of the weirdest myths and legends. Only now, with the rediscovery of Carter's papers and diaries and pictures, with our own digging in the archive, only now can all this be cut away so that we can understand his complex personality, appreciate the significance of his discoveries, and marvel at the real legacy of the boy king Tutankhamun. The Egypt of the 1890s, when Carter first started working there, was a vast treasure house of antiquities, to be visited almost at will by Western archaeologists, travelers fascinated by the romance and fantasy of the East, and administrators and soldiers supporting the veiled protectorate exercised by the British. Egyptologists could now understand the written language of the ancients, and archaeology was in the process of becoming more organized as Western science encountered Eastern splendor. This was the atmosphere and the world to which the young Howard Carter would be drawn. Howard Carter was born in London, off the Old Brompton Road, Kensington, on the 9th of May, 1874, but it was here, in the small market town of Swaffham in northwest Norfolk, that he spent his childhood. His father, Samuel Carter, earned his living as a painter of animals, wild, domestic, and agricultural, and as an illustrator, also of animal subjects, for the Illustrated London News. In fact, Carter family tradition has it that Samuel did the original drawings for the great Landseer lion sculptures at the foot of Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square. But then again, Carter family tradition tended to romanticize the hard facts. Howard was the youngest of 11 children, 8 of whom survived infancy. And because he was a weak, sickly child, he was sent away from London to be raised on his own in a farming community by 2 unmarried aunts. His education here was minimal. I was, he said, unable to go through a regular school training. It began later than usual and ended at the early age of 15.
The grass made up 14. Roger Groom.
He grew up in this house, a solitary boy with something of a chip on his shoulder which would last for the rest of his life. But some things he did inherit in abundance: a good eye, a love of natural history, and a Norfolk accent. Didlington Hall, home of the celebrated Amherst family, was a 10-mile walk from Swaffham. And the young Howard Carter spent a lot of time here, drawing in the garden and listening to stories about ancient Egypt and its archaeology. For the Amhersts, who took Howard under their wing, were early and influential members of the Egypt Exploration Fund. Didlington Hall housed the greatest private collection of Egyptian objects in Britain. To Howard Carter, this was all pure magic, and as he put it, it gave him a premature longing for that particular country and his first experience of drawing Egyptian objects. It was his artistic talents which secured for him at the age of 17 a job in Egypt as a draftsman and tracer.
Stiff and dirty, after a long journey, we crossed over the river to the east bank in an antiquated native ferry boat. There, we climbed up to the rock terrace of the escarpment, where the ancient tombs are situated.
His first posting for the Exploration Fund was 150 miles up the Nile from Cairo to the Middle Kingdom rock tombs of Beni Hassan. The tombs contained magnificent paintings, memorials, and inscriptions, which covered about 12,000 square feet of wall space. Carter was the youngest member of a survey team whose function it was accurately to trace and record the wall decorations. Also, to make watercolor drawings of the most important details. He was deeply impressed by the quality of the art, especially its line and color, but he felt that the tracings tended to lack life and imagination. He preferred doing watercolor versions, such as these. Above all, it was the romance of the place which got to him.
As twilight fell silently upon the rock cliffs, there was a look of gloom, an aspect of dreary isolation, which gave rise to disturbed phantoms which sometimes haunt the mind on the eve of adventure. Most nights, I watched the brilliant, starry heavens, and in imagination called up strange spirits from the past until the first gleam of dawn, when, from sheer fatigue, I fell into a deep sleep.
After half a season working as a tracer in Middle Egypt, Howard Carter moved south across the desert to join the new excavations at the remote site of El Amarna, the ancient ruined city of the pharaoh Akhenaten.
A camel's hump is said to vary in size according to the condition of the animal. My old beast must have been in excellent condition. He appeared to have a lump everywhere. I rode him astride, sometimes sideways, but no ways could I get used to his rolling side-to-side wobble.
Flinders Petrie, the gifted and eccentric father of modern archaeology, had recently started excavations at El Amarna, a city which had been ransacked and deserted after the death of its pharaoh. Petrie gave the 17-year-old artist a brisk, on-site apprenticeship in the sheer hard slog of archaeology. Carter was given his first chance to practice a little independent excavation on his own. So he learned his craft, as he put it, from the very best and sternest of taskmasters. Carter's next move in October 1893 as an artist and draftsman was up the Nile again to Thebes, the traditional capital of ancient Egypt and the city of the living, with its nearby City of the Dead just across the river.
My recreation from the drudgery of this everyday work was to watch and paint the wildlife. My wild friends were fairly abundant, though diverse in character, mostly with feathers. The birds which delight in eking out a precarious existence in desolate solitude.
Carter's new posting was with the Egypt Exploration Fund at Deir el-Bahri, the fantastic mortuary temple of the woman pharaoh Hatshepsut, ancient Egypt's most powerful queen. His role was to record the beautiful reliefs which were emerging in the course of excavations of the walls and pillars of the temple.
Although the next 6 years were hard work, I learned much more of the Egyptians' art than in any other place or time.
Carter also learned how to apply his artistic training, what he called the profession my father taught me, to the copying in watercolour of paintings and reliefs and wall sculptures and inscriptions. Now, the traditional approach to copying involved sticking some tracing paper to the wall and tracing the outlines before sending the outlines off to a draftsman off-site who'd fill them in silhouette. Carter preferred an approach which involved much more skill and imagination and intelligence. As he put it, a free hand, some good pencils and brushes, some suitable paper, and honest work. In fact, he didn't like to call this copying at all. He much preferred the phrase drawing work, which sounded a lot less clerical and menial. But there's no doubt it resulted in far better reproductions than the old tracing method, reproductions which drew attention to Carter's abilities for the first time. In 1899, at the age of 25, to the great surprise of his associates, Carter was offered the post of Chief Inspector of Antiquities for the whole of southern Egypt by the French-administered Egyptian Antiquities Service. This senior post required him to be policeman, diplomat, and archaeologist, and his sphere of operations now included the Valley of the Kings at Thebes.
The Valley of the Kings. Of all Egypt's wonders, there is none, I suppose, that makes more instant appeal to the imagination. Here, in this lonely valley head, remote from every sound of life, with the Horn, the highest peak in the Theban hills, standing sentinel like a natural pyramid above them, lay many of Egypt's kings.
But as Chief Inspector, Carter didn't have the funds to excavate. For that, he'd need a wealthy backer. Theodore Davis, retired American lawyer, millionaire, and archaeology enthusiast, amply fitted the bill, and the two men began working together. Dr. Donald Ryan, an American archaeologist of today, has specialized in retracing Howard Carter's footsteps of this period in the Valley of the Kings, including the rediscovery of tombs which had, surprisingly, been lost again in the meantime.
I'm gonna get this big one here.
How's it going down there?
A couple more minutes. We'll have enough of it cleared so we can go in.
One of the tombs which Don Ryan has recently rediscovered and studied is the anonymous tomb number 60 in a tributary valley on the eastern edge of the Valley of the Kings. Howard Carter first unearthed this tomb in 1903, but was disappointed that in his view its treasures had, as in so many cases, been thoroughly looted and destroyed in ancient times.
Okay, watch your step, Christopher. These steps weren't made very well. In fact, this entire tomb is crudely carved. I don't think there's a straight line in the entire tomb. It's my feeling that the tomb was commissioned at the death of somebody important and just hacked out in a short period of time. Now the ceiling here is very low, so you're gonna have to watch your head. Right.
So despite the fact the tomb contained the denuded mummies of two elderly women, Carter closed it down again and didn't even bother to leave a map of its exact location.
And Howard Carter dashed into this tomb, looked around, saw there were no inscriptions on the wall, apparently was not impressed. Some of these boxes are the various materials that we collected from the different parts of the tomb when we cleared this thing back in 1989.
And Carter missed all of this?
Well, he wasn't interested in this type of tomb. He was into something bigger and better in his mind. And this big wooden box contains the mummy we found lying in approximately this very place on the floor. There was a second mummy in here, and on its coffin it said Royal Nurse of Queen Hatshepsut. As far as this mummy which remains inside this box, we don't know exactly who it might be. So when you have an undecorated tomb, it can be quite an archaeological puzzle. This tomb's a little different. You're gonna like it a lot.
Another tomb in the valley, the nearby Tomb 20, was cleared of debris by Howard Carter in the 1903-04 season, where he dug through to two quartzite sarcophagi within it. It's one of the deepest, steepest and most treacherous tombs in Egypt, and, then and now, full of air which is foul with the stench of tomb dust and bat dung.
It was one of the most irksome pieces of work I ever supervised. There was serious danger of the rock falling in upon us. And to add to our trouble, the air was also very bad. Candles would not give sufficient light, and I was obliged to introduce an air pump. Even then, the workmen could only work 3 hours at a time.
Oh, stench. It's really good. What is it, you think?
I think you know what it is. It's bat guano. I suggest you get against the wall or something, because these things, I think there'll be a lot more coming. Here, stay against the wall, Christopher. All right?
They are revolting creatures.
Just better sit still until they go by.
God, I think one of them touched my face. You think they're rabid, Dom?
There's no way of telling, really.
No, I don't want to find out either. Come on, I think we ought to get out.
After you, Maestro. Okay.
Howard Carter spent his years as chief inspector, refining his technique as an excavator, getting to know every inch of the Theban necropolis, and developing a feel for reading the signs. With the tomb of Tutmosis IV, which he began excavating in January 1903, Carter found exactly the kind of tomb he was looking for, and incidentally, Theodore Davis was paying for. He too would have left his hat outside to show passers-by that he was at work within. Hey, this is more like it.
This is just the kind of tomb Howard Carter was hoping to find. It's a beautifully painted royal tomb of the 18th dynasty. All the little tombs he found prior to this really pale in comparison.
Carter said about this that at last he'd drawn a prize in the lottery of excavation. His moment of triumph.
We can see right here, there's some ancient evidence of tomb robbery. This is an ancient tomb robber's rope that was tied around the pillar here. You can see it's knotted so that the tomb robbers could climb up and down.
Incredible.
What does an excavator do in the moment of triumph, when he feels he has drawn a large prize? Here were all the proofs that I had found the tomb of Pharaoh Thutmose IV,
Have a look at
which,
this.
as you may conceive, gave me a considerable degree of satisfaction.
This is a bit of ancient graffiti written in a cursive form of hieroglyphs. And it says, year 8, 3rd month of summer, day 1, in the reign of King Horemheb. That'd be about 1311 BC. King Horemheb commanded Maya, which was one of his officials, restore the burial of King Thutmose IV.
Restore the burial, what does that mean?
It means that within 80 years of the burial of King Thutmose IV, his tomb had been robbed.
It looks like someone's tried to cut out that goddess's head. Do you think that might have happened in antiquity as well?
Probably not. The robbers in antiquity were more interested in precious metals and jewels and gold and such, whereas more modern robbers would be more interested in artistic things that they could sell on the art market.
Within this burial chamber, everything had been broken to bits and thrown helter-skelter by those ruthless vandals, the tomb plunderers, who in their thirst for gold had spared nothing.
And this is the great quartzite sarcophagus of Thutmose IV, although his mummy would never be found in this tomb.
Carter, I think, said that there were all sorts of bits of linen and ceramic lying around the sarcophagus here, so that the scene resembled an orgy rather than a hallowed place. And I believe he thought that the robbers of antiquity had done it. By 1904, Howard Carter's work as Inspector of Antiquities and as archaeologist had earned him a great deal of respect, if not always affection, among the communities in which he mixed. Above all, the local villagers of Gorna on the way to the Valley of the Kings. He'd learned to speak their language, he even on occasion dressed like them, and he sometimes preferred their company to that of his European colleagues.
To while away the darker nights, I indulge in the diversions of the guest house. I must admit, however, that this practice was liable to serious criticism by colleagues in the government service. They thought it degrading.
In late 1904, Carter was moved from the Inspectorate of Upper to Lower Egypt, which included in its sphere of influence the great necropolis around the step pyramid of Saqqara. After 5 years, it was time for a change, but unfortunately, the new post was to go disastrously wrong. A week into the new year of 1905, and a party of some 15 French people, having had a jolly good lunch over in the palm groves of Memphis, and having had several bottles of wine to wash it down, arrived here at the Saqqara necropolis by donkey and asked in a semi-coherent way to see the monuments. The local ticket inspector, naturally enough, asked them for their money, and several of them refused to pay. They hung around, had a few more drinks, and made their way down to the Serapeum. The Serapeum is an underground complex of tombs where the sacred bulls of Apis were buried. There, the French visitors, not all of whom had tickets, found that without candles, they couldn't see a thing. So they demanded their money back, at which point the tomb guard had his tarbouche knocked off his head. It was time for Chief Inspector Howard Carter to be summoned to confront the French. He asked for everyone's name and address and requested the group to leave the site immediately. They refused, and in the course of further exchanges, one of the tomb guards was hit in the face, and Carter himself was threatened with a punch on the nose. The phrase dirty French was heard by several witnesses to soil Howard Carter's lips as he ordered his men to defend themselves as best they could. A couple of tomb guards were quite seriously hurt, an interior decorator got hit on the head, an accountant from a French gas company was felled to the ground with a truncheon. Any compromise on Carter's part would have settled things. To set natives against Europeans, he was told, was not proper. But he simply wouldn't see it that way. In the next few days, Howard Carter demanded that legal action be taken against the French who'd started the affray in the first place, while on the French side, a formal complaint was lodged with Monsieur Gaston Maspereau, the Director of Antiquities. This made Carter even more stubborn, and he began to ask for a public apology as well. He, the Gaffirs under his command, the profession of archaeologists, and the British Empire, probably in that order, had all been slighted, and he wanted satisfaction. The fragile entente cordiale between the British and French communities was getting less cordial by the minute. Maspereau felt a token expression of regret to the French Consul General was in order. Theodore Davis advised him to give in for the sake of peace and harmony. That, he added, was the gentlemanly thing to do. But Carter wouldn't budge. So, at the age of 31, he'd done serious damage to an exemplary career and subsequently resigned. He returned south to Luxor and lived in self-imposed isolation amongst the locals in the foothills of the City of the Dead. For the next 3 years, he guided wealthy visitors around the sites of Upper Egypt and sought commissions for his watercolor paintings. He was short of money, and it was a hand-to-mouth sort of existence.
A far greater trial lies in the monotonous life that one is obliged to lead. The wearisome sameness day after day, the passing of months without companionship, a loneliness that can at times become almost intolerable. Without some mental occupation, it would, I believe, become suicidal.
In summer 1907, Carter returned to England, where he learned that Lord and Lady Amherst, who'd encouraged him to go to Egypt in the first place, had hit hard times. Didlington Hall was up for sale, and the great Egyptian collection was to be dispersed. His world seemed to be collapsing all around him.
Didlington is in brown paper parcels, and Lady Amherst is saving odd bits of string.
But his love of Egypt and the fact he had nowhere else to go took him back, where he added a new occupation to his makeshift career as a part-time dealer in antiquities, a job for which he was well qualified. He knew what he was doing and was well known to those who regularly sold their discoveries and acquisitions in the bazaars and side streets. It was a case of gamekeeper turned poacher.
And are these popular, these kind of things?
And your ceiling, now that really is old, eh?
But not for sale.
If Carter was to return from this unhappy interlude to the work he most wanted, the work of the excavator, he'd need another wealthy patron to support him. George Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon, was a sporting gentleman. In the early years of the century, he'd had a spectacular motoring accident, which led him to spend time away from the family home at Highclere Castle, Wiltshire, on doctor's orders, in a place where the climate was said to be better for him, and also to his search for another absorbing pastime, the excavation and collection of Egyptian antiquities. I would much rather, he said, find an unrifled tomb than win the Derby. And he was in the enviable position to do both. At first, Carnarvon was granted a permit to excavate here in a part of the Theban necropolis where even an amateur could do little damage. It had been rummaged over many times before, and all he had to show for his investment was a mummified cat. But he was absolutely thrilled with it and determined to secure a better concession. For this, he would need a professional advisor and assistant, someone with more credibility. Gaston Maspero suggested his ex-colleague, Howard Carter. It was the start of a most unlikely friendship between the grandee who admired Carter's skills and the craftsman who returned the compliment by modelling himself on his patron. Neither of them could imagine where the partnership would eventually take them. As a sign of Carter's newfound security, he decided to design and build his own castle, a permanent home at the entrance to the Valley of the Kings, which he called Castle Carter. What he yearned for was a concession in the valley itself. What he got was permission to work around its margins. Remote and difficult areas, such as the mountains 1,800 feet above the valley, which involved several hours' trek by donkey and on foot across the hot desert, sometimes concealed secret tombs. The most dramatic discovery occurred a while later, when Howard Carter heard down the grapevine that a rock tomb in a sheer cliff face had been revealed by a flash flood, and that tomb robbers were already at work. Dr. Don Ryan took me on a hair-raising trip in temperatures which reached 55 degrees centigrade to retrace Howard Carter's steps towards the scene of the crime. How much further have we got to go?
A little ways further, but from here it's all on foot.
How long will it take?
20 minutes, half hour, something like that.
That's your pace.
It's your pace.
I should think about 3 hours.
There it is.
You're kidding me. So where's the tomb?
It's a little opening up in the cliff.
God. That one there, halfway down.
Right, that's it.
How on earth do you get to it?
look.
How'd you get down there? God. I think it looks lethal.
Piece of cake.
Oh, yeah. That's pretty inaccessible. They certainly hid it. So you have to come down from the top?
Right.
You've obviously done this before.
Once or twice.
I haven't, Donald.
It's not a problem.
I see. There isn't and wasn't a path up this mountain, just a field of boulders with a sheer drop on either side of it, which has seldom been disturbed since Carter's day. God.
We're right on top of the cliff right now.
It's all getting a bit macho for me.
Great. Let's do it.
When we arrived above the tomb, I found that the plundering Arabs had crept down a crack extending halfway down the cleft to a narrow ledge in the rock. For anyone who suffers from vertigo, it certainly was not pleasant.
Oh, it's slippy.
This is the easy part.
Thank you.
Ow. Sorry about that. Rock fall.
There's plenty more where that came from. Point of no return coming. Where'd I put my leg?
Right here.
Right. Well done. Well done. My goodness. It's just a sheer drop.
Well, this is where we set up the ropes. See? Right? Here comes the wind.
Don, I don't think that I'm going to go any further. I've made it to the plateau. I think Carter calls it not for people with vertigo, and I'll drink to that. I think I'll leave it to the professional from here on.
I wholeheartedly concur.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Okay.
I'm deeply impressed with the range of skills that archaeologists show. Had no idea.
Carter probably used a knotted rope of some sort. It would be pretty scary. And he didn't have all this modern mountaineering equipment. Solid.
That's reassuring.
All right, I'm going to give this a toss. Rope!
The guide pointed out to me the end of a rope which dangled sheer down the face of a cliff. Listening, we could hear the robbers actually at work. So I first severed their rope, cutting off their means of escape, and then, making secure a good stout rope of my own, I lowered myself down the cliff.
Set. And ready.
Chocks away. You okay?
Oh, yeah.
No problem. It's a bit bumpy.
Shinning down a rope into a nest full of industrious tomb robbers is a pastime which at least does not lack excitement. There were 8 at work, and I gave them the alternative of clearing out by means of my rope, or else of staying where they were without a rope at all. Eventually, they saw reason.
Carter wasn't sure what he'd find inside this cunningly concealed tomb 130 feet down from the top of the cliff. It had a half-finished, unoccupied look to it. It seemed that the tomb was originally intended for the young Hatshepsut, who'd had an inscribed quartzite sarcophagus placed there in readiness, but that after she seized the throne, she abandoned it for a grander memorial and a mortuary temple, that same temple on which Howard Carter had worked for 6 years.
Oh, this is very strange. This little room here is full of water. I'm not going in there. This is water that probably entered this tomb sometime during the winter. The rains that occurred filled this tomb.
So, after the incredible labor and imagination involved in preparing it, this cliff tomb was never used.
In this secret spot, her mummy would have had a reasonable chance of avoiding disturbance. In the valley, it had none. A king she would be, and a king's fate she shared.
How was it, Don?
Been damaged excessively by flooding. See, when Howard Carter was working on this tomb over a period of 20 days, he came up and down this little bit here in a net.
Let down by someone from above or from below?
Hell, probably with a pulley of some sort.
Yeah. Sounds a more civilized way to travel to me. There you go. Thank you, old chap. Well done.
In spring 1914, Theodore Davis publicly announced that the Valley of the Tombs is now exhausted, and he pulled out. But Carter was convinced there was still at least one more tomb to be found, and he had good reason.
Every day, hundreds of tourists walk past this spot, which is unmarked, without even noticing it. And yet, it played a key part in the research which led to Howard Carter's great discovery.
The research involved a series of finds made between 1905 and 1909 under the patronage of Theodore Davis, in particular the discovery of some objects which proved to bear the name Tutancâmon.
The discovery was from this so-called tomb, which is less of a tomb really, more of a box cut into the rock. And it took the form of 12 storage jars, the remains of a funerary feast, some embalming fluid, and some seal impressions. Theodore Davis was convinced he'd stumbled on the badly plundered tomb of Tutancâmon, and he said as much at a public gathering where he also showed what happened to papyrus when it had been buried for over 3,000 years by tearing a large piece of it to pieces in front of the assembled company. Howard Carter was less convinced. He came to believe that the objects which were removed from this so-called tomb had been taken from another royal tomb, which must be located nearby.
The true significance of these discoveries wasn't appreciated until later, by which time Carter had planned a systematic search of the valley beyond. But his plans came abruptly to a halt. At the age of 40, Carter wasn't expected to see active service in the First World War. But at the beginning of 1915, he was recruited into the shadowy world of the intelligence department of the War Office in Cairo, where his knowledge of Arabic was useful for official communications, and where he became a kind of king's messenger. But it wasn't until the end of the war that he could return to archaeology in earnest.
Work resumed in the valley in December 1917, with Howard Carter still digging on behalf of Lord Carnarvon, but now planning what he called a systematic and exhaustive approach to the whole business of finding an undiscovered tomb. It was an approach which involved taking a 2.5-acre area of ground, defined by the triangle the tomb of Ramses VI, the tomb of Meneptah, and the tomb of Ramses II. A triangle rather like this: Ramses VI, Meneptah, Ramses II. Then, dividing it up on a grid system derived from plans for artillery barrages in the First World War, and then systematically digging away all the loose chippings and debris right down to the bedrock. As Carter commented, in 1917, our real campaign in the valley commenced.
Carnarvon employed up to 100 men to shift thousands of tons of stone chippings thrown up by previous excavations. As 5 seasons went by, Carnarvon was all for abandoning a search which seemed to be getting nowhere slowly. But Carter argued for one last season, which he even offered to fund himself, and Carnarvon eventually agreed. The season would begin on the 1st of November 1922 with the clearance of the remains of some ancient workmen's huts built for the labourers who dug the tomb of Ramses VI. It was his last chance.
3 days later, a slab of limestone was uncovered here, probably by the water boy, the most junior member of the workforce. It turned out to be a step cut into the bedrock. By late afternoon, the outlines of 12 steps had been cleared, leading down to the upper part of a door, which was plastered and sealed. But the seal impressions on the door were indistinct.
With enormous self-control, Carter ordered the steps to be filled in and sent a telegram in code to Lord Carnarvon.
At last have made wonderful discovery in valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations.
2.5 weeks later, Lord Carnarvon and his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, arrived in Egypt, and by the afternoon of the 24th of November, the stairwell had been cleared.
Digging down a few inches below the seal impressions he'd already looked at, they unearthed some much clearer ones. Carter could even make out a name on one of them, the name of Tutancâmon.
But their excitement became anxiety when they saw that the door had been opened by force at least once before and then replastered and resealed in antiquity. The door was carefully removed, revealing a 30-foot sloping passageway filled with limestone chippings, through which a tunnel had already been dug and again refilled in the top left-hand corner. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon of Sunday, 26th of November, the passageway had been cleared. There was a second sealed door. His hand shaking, his throat dry, Carter cut a small hole through the door. He lit a candle and peered into the darkness.
At first I could see nothing. The hot air escaping from the chamber caused the candle flame to flicker. But presently, as my eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room within emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues, and gold. Everywhere, the glint of gold.